Wache Misue. My name is Nipi Mishkiki or Nabe Mishkiki, and I am making a short video on structural thinking, power, and reciprocity. I have some smudgelit, and then I have my lovely dog Muskwa, which means bear, and Mushkego Moen. So he wanted to join the video. Plus, he's so cute that honestly everyone should see him because he's just the cutest thing on the planet. Okay, getting to the video. So something I want to talk about, honestly, that has been on my mind for quite some time is the things that I've witnessed across many governance gatherings that I've attended for First Nations governance. And there seems to be this very shared feeling of a cycle that keeps repeating itself or unearthing itself every single time in those spaces. So communities in these situations where we gather and have everyone come together, they continue to share knowledge and priorities and of course solutions and ideas. And this has gone on for generations after generations, right, Muskwa? He said, yeah. But the same dialogue has been happening for sometimes 50 years or even more in some cases. And I noticed that becomes exhausting in and of itself. So my question, I guess, is how many times do communities get invited to share, to advise, to advocate within political bodies, with leadership, with governments? And yet I find the reciprocity in that process and relationship, kinship ties, is not always returned. To be honest, it sometimes isn't even returned at all, but most times I notice that it's not very much thought about or practiced and modeled. And so reciprocity has to show up in ways that people can feel and see it in practice. It can't just live in basic policy documents and policy language and lingo that we write and create for different areas of various topics. That kind of one-sided relationship itself, not giving reciprocity and that understanding of the roles and responsibilities with that, it ends up creating a very one-sided relationship, and it affects the psychological, emotional, spiritual, and mental exhaustion of a community collectively and individually, and exhaustion on continuing work forward in a different way. And so I think it's important for me, I'm naming it to say that reciprocity is very important, and when it's not there, these forms of psychological, spiritual, and emotional, and mental exhaustion and extraction is real. So when this happens, when communities are bringing forward these ideas, knowledge, vision, and foresight, they're actually offering us a structural analysis. They're showing that the roots that built the foundations for many, many years basically are not shifting or haven't shifted and become quite stagnant and tend to end up becoming very strict practices that don't change very often over generations. So in my eyes, to understand it and describe an analogy is that the roots of anything is what grows the plant and the soil, of course. But collectively, we have to water that plant through relationship reciprocity, through relational decision-making, community, decision-making consensus, if we want to use the word consensus, and genuine care to build those kinship networks again. And if we don't really practice that, or we don't really model or start to think indifferently about these ways or reframing them when working with community and supporting them genuinely, I fear, and I do see this happening, where community knowledge itself ends up becoming another form of extraction, and it's not really honoring what's being said and shared in a particular space over years and years and years. And you have people repeating themselves for years and years and years, and that alone is very frustrating to see. And I want to add that when we're building kinship and relationship networks within communities, it has to be done also with the spirit of intent. Now, for those who do know, treaty, for instance, treaty number 9, where my territory is from, we always talk about the spirit of intent with treaty making. But the spirit of intent is not only about treaties, it's also about everything that we do, right, Muskwa? It's everything that we do. It's about reciprocity and care, roles and responsibilities to the future generation, the here and the now, and the past as well, to honor our ancestors and to take care of our community kin relations. So the way I understand it is that we all carry roles and responsibilities within community. And one of my roles has been to look at structural governance and power, studying power and governance, including how language operates. So I find a lot of times within this, when policy language and these types of documents are created within communities, the translation of it really gets lost, and language ends up becoming very inaccessible when it isn't shared in ways that communities learn and hold knowledge, or their own distinct languages where they would like to implement and integrate that into the way they create policies and governance structures for their own distinct nations and communities. Sorry, my dog's gonna jump down. You go there. Good boy. So yeah, where was I? Okay. Yeah, and so when it isn't shared in these ways that communities understand, and not understand in lack of knowledge, but just it's colonial language oftentimes and legal language that's very jargon heavy. And if you didn't go study with a law degree, you can't expect people to be able to really pick up what you're putting down. And I don't think that has anything to do with a person who studied law being better than anyone else. It's just different modes of language used to understand and articulate certain things within structural governance, institution, and rights as well. But we need to recognize that language itself holds power. It is power. It's a mode of power. And so the words that we use and how we use them, and all those ways that we write about them in policy and within our own community policies, within our own strategic planning and visioning, they all come from a very distinct history and ongoing impacts of how it's affecting the community at large and on the ground on the everyday ongoing basis in life. So when we hear we've been here before in a lot of governance, when people constantly say we've been here before 50 years, talking about the same things and repeating the same issues, I don't want to say issues, but a lot of the struggles and things that we're trying to redress or figure out a way forward, solutions to, it's not just a frustration that is being expressed. Really, it's actually intergenerational memory. And what I mean by that is we have that intergenerational blood memory where, we can feel our ancestors have been having these same conversations for generations. We can feel them in the room with us. We can feel and see how things move and how these cycles are re-perpetuated within these spaces. And it's important to recognize that this work has been done long before I've been here in my generation. And so I do think often of my mushil and kukam, my grandma and grandpa in these pieces, and I can feel them when I'm in governance places and we're talking. And so it's learning how to be able to pay attention to those things and remember that, this is part of blood memory work. Also, back to the reciprocity piece, one-sided relationships are how colonial systems have often operated and continue to operate largely. But it's important for me to say that that is not the only pathway, and it doesn't have to be the only pathway as well. So I'm going to share a very short story about a squirrel, and it's real. So to kind of explain it a bit further on here. Keep us fun. So I was walking down the street here in Ottawa, and there was a squirrel on a roof, and it was screaming at the top of the roof, like really loudly. It was just screaming. And ahead of me was a bunch of people walking ahead in the sidewalk, and everybody just walked and didn't even recognize that the squirrel was screaming, completely ignored it, to be honest, tunnel vision wise. And then I noticed the squirrel right away, and I was talking to the squirrel just like, hey, like, wache, introduce myself in the language, how you doing? And the squirrel was like telling me very clearly through its body and through its voice that it wasn't okay. And it turns out, to make the story short, the squirrel was a baby squirrel, a benonji, a baby squirrel that its mother, I guess, it was abandoned by its mother. I don't know the backstory of why, but it was. And I ended up having to, I got the squirrel in my apartment because it was cold. It was getting like wintertime, and he was malnutrition. He didn't have much, he wasn't like healthy in that state. And I found a squirrel sanctuary that he was able to go get rehabilitated to. And he was eventually let go back into nature and is healthy now and went back to the weight that he was supposed to be. So the moral of the story is that everybody ahead had like this tunnel vision where we almost forget that there's other things, other pathways, other solutions, and other understandings that are there. It's just, do we pay attention and allow ourselves to pay attention closely to that? Because like that squirrel, a lot of people just walked by it and didn't even take the moment to even realize what was happening. And then for me, I was able to hear the squirrel and I paid close attention. And so it comes to show that sometimes we get so tunnel vision thinking there's only one way because of colonialism and assimilation and complacency with like within colonial structures that happens all the time as well. And we become so fearful of the unknown and change and other ways of looking at pathways forward. And so the squirrel is a prime example within the story of being, I called the squirrel Ogichida warrior is the name I gave it. Basically being a warrior and reminding myself and the story that I could share forward that, you know, to be paying attention to your surroundings, paying attention to the things you're hearing at governance conferences, paying attention to see what the patterns are and the common themes that come forward, but pay attention also to the animals, pay attention to the land as the seasons change, pay attention to your dreams and the visions that you're receiving. If you do attend ceremony, paying attention in ceremony. And so right now we're just in a very pivotal point of paying attention helps us see the things that may already be trying to communicate with us that we often lose sight of because we, you know, disconnect the logic part of the brain from our heart and our spirit. And so part of unlearning and relearning is that process of learning to pay attention to other pathways that exist that are sometimes right in front of our face. And it's just, are we listening really, or are we paying attention? And so, yeah, that's pretty much what my little short video is on for discussing structural thinking, power, and reciprocity. Again, these are things I've seen within communities around governance conversations. And of course, there's so many more elements involved, but for a starting point of a video, I just wanted to share that story and kind of bring this up that reciprocity is necessary in my eyes for relationship building. And, you know, as much as we want to, I know many people would say change doesn't happen overnight, absolutely, but we all have a responsibility to water that plant and remembering that oftentimes communities already are aware and saying out loud structural analysis of power, and they're saying it. And, you know, so if this common thing keeps coming up, how can we learn from it? How can we learn to unlearn the things that stop us from listening, or maybe create challenges and barriers to doing something with it to address the roots that create the foundation in the first place? And so that's something I just wanted to share here. In no way, shape, or form am I saying I have all the answers at all, but I am saying that this is something I've paid very close attention to, and I wanted to share that because I feel I have a role and responsibility to. And having been to many governance conferences, I've written so many notes of like drawings and pictures and things like that to kind of capture what people have said. And I keep those because it's important for me to actually honor what people are saying. And I don't want that knowledge to just get lost on like into the abyss. And so I'm quite cognizant of listening really carefully and understanding that what's being shared is sacred, and that to do that means showing up with spirit of intent and showing up with integrity, showing up with ethical care and responsibility, and recognizing that to give is to also receive. You can't just take knowledge and extract from it and just take community information and gathering them to share all these things just to not really do anything with it that actually gives that reciprocity back in a way that is meaningful and also follows like genuine integrity. So relationality is just that understanding of reciprocity, our kinship relationships of networks that we had, and understanding governance structures that are distinct to each nation. Like some may have clan system governance structures. And so it's really though about recognizing power showing up in so many ways, and there's so many other layers involved. But really, I'm more interested in understanding how we can take understanding of power within communities and start to remodel and relearn and undo some of the harms that we're perpetuating, whether that be intentionally or unintentionally, they're learned. And so learning to take time to educate and inform, gathering spaces together on how we can move forward in a good way, and learning how complacency and rigidity within cycles of structures and conversations and institutions continue to remain, and that the roots are the things that definitely need to be paid close attention to, and is one area that can really help show those pieces if you just listen and pay really close attention. Miigwech, thank you for listening.